This lesson, we're going to be updating our HTML, building out a form, and updating some of this code here so that we can actually take the parameters from our form and send it over into our server to simulate making posts to the server, and then the server could pick up that data and make use of it on the server side. So first of all, we needed a form, and within the form, let's create some inputs. So the first input type, and we'll do a text. And this one can be something like first name, and I'll give it a value so I don't always have to keep typing in values. And do a line break. Let's do a few more inputs. So next one, let's do last name or last. Keep it nice and short. And we can also get things like the company. So let's do this one as company. So there we go. So we only need an input button now in order to send our data. So we need a submit button. That's actually going to submit the form. And this is going to be an input submit button. And we'll give it a value, send my data. So there we go. We can get rid of this button. And now we should have a form here. So let's double check. Always like to check my HTML. Just make sure everything is working properly. And of course, we're getting an error there because we got rid of the element that that event listener was attached to. So now we can add an event listener. So this event listener we're going to put on the my form. So let's update this one. And instead of query selector, let's do get element by ID because we've got an ID for the form, so we might as well use it. And instead of event listener, let's clean this up as well. So we're going to use my form, add event listener, and instead of click, so we're no longer listening for click, we're listening for a submit. And here we can let's do the whole function in here. So function, and they're passing that event parameter so that we can pick it up. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to prevent default. So we don't want that one firing off. We don't want the data being submitted. So next, what we want to do is we want to grab our data from the form and we want to stringify it. So that will give us the ability to pass it into our format. So it's this type of format for the form. So we're going to probably create a function in order to do that so we can loop through all of the inputs, create it into an object. So let's set that part up. So variable, and we'll just call it data for now. And we're going to create a function for form data, and we're passing all of the my form information into it. And then let's console log out our data. So this is the data that's going to be returned from the function that we are about to create. So let's create a function, and this function, so this is form data. We're passing in the form information. And let's use query selector all. So we're going to select all of the inputs that have a type that is equal to text. So grab a whole bunch of those inputs. And what we want to do is we want to loop through them. So first of all, let's set up a container, an object to hold all of our contents there. And then let's do the for loop. So for x equals 0, and we're going to loop through the length of all of the elements. Oops, forgot the equal sign there. So all of the elements length. And let's increment x so we can actually break out of our loop. And let's set this up. So I'm going to break it out first, and of course we could shorten it if we wanted to. So element x, and we're going to grab the name of the element, and variable value will be equal to element x, and this time we're grabbing the value. And we're putting it into my data. So this is our container. We're putting it via the name. So giving the object a name and then a value. And then after we finish our loop, it's simply going to return back the my data. So hopefully after all of this, whenever we submit the form, we're gonna prevent the default action, which is submitting the form, going to another page, because of course we're using Ajax and we're putting it into a variable called data, and then we're console logging out data. So let's try that out. So refresh, send data. So there we go. So we're getting it in an object format, and this way we're almost ready to send it over to the server. But notice that it is slightly different because over here we've got this type of format for the data. So what we can do with the data is we can stringify it. So let's try that. So JSON and stringify, and then just we'll stringify all of that data. And now let's see what that looks like now. So refresh, send data. So we're ready to send it over to the server. So let's, instead of load joke, load JSON. And we're going to pass over that data over to here. And then we're just going to pick that up and we're going to make use of it as my data. So make a few updates there. And let's pass over the data object. So now we're ready to try this out. So let's go ahead and open up our browser, just refresh it and send the data over. So we see that it's done the round trip, it's been sent over to the server, and we've got our response back from the server. So now it's a matter of formatting the data because the server might be expecting it in a different type of format. And we saw that earlier what actually worked is when we were sending it within this type of format. So the idea here is that we're actually not presenting it like that for the server. And you can see that when I log out that data. Let's go back in here, and when we submit, we see that when we log that out, it's presented within this stringified JSON format. So it's actually sending it as a string JSON format. So maybe not the best way that we could send that data. So let's make some updates to it. And unfortunately for us, this server that we're connecting to right now, it is expecting it within a form format. So it's not going to take a content type of JSON. So this might be different for the server that you're trying to connect to. And they all would vary depending on what you've got in the headers and what you're allowing. So we are trying to connect across multiple domains here, and it does present an issue. So let's update our code in order to have it more in this type of format. So this is going to be a quick fix update type thing, and not necessarily something that you might have to do for your server. It all depends on how much control you have and what type of data that you can expect. And if you're working on the server end, you've got probably more options that you could take that data in and make use of it on the server end. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just doing a really quick fix here that I'm updating the way that we're sending the data so that it is similar to what we had working earlier. And we're also going to get rid of the stringify as well. So we won't need that stringify option. And I can just, I can update this. So we're getting the data from my form still, sending it over to here, and over here we still need to slice this out. So we're going to return a sliced version. We're going to be removing off that ampersand at the end. And let's take a look and see what this looks like now. So refresh, send, and we see that it's a lot more in line with what we had earlier. So with a little bit of tweaking and updating, you can always accomplish what you're trying to do, and sometimes it does take a little bit of JavaScripting in order to update how you're sending that data over. And in this case, it was just because the server wasn't accepting JSON formatted content, and we had to format it within this type. So go ahead and try this out for yourself. Try it out on your own server. Retrieve that data that's being sent over through the AJAX call. Make some use for it. And also you can send back a response back. And again, it doesn't necessarily need to be exactly as the one that I'm working with over here, where it's sending back a JSON formatted response. But if it is JSON formatted, then you can use the response JSON and pick that information back up and make use of it within your application. So try it out for yourself and see what you can make happen with Ajax and Fetch.